Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Dark Evolution by Jonathan Yañez. Narrated by Rachel Leblang. 1. Sydney.
She needs you, right now. She's alone, fighting them all by herself, and she needs your help.
Sydney looked at the remaining defenders inside the Lazarus outpost with tears of frustration. She knew they would dismiss anything she had to say due to her age. What did a child know about the world and sacrifice? Sydney knew it better than most. Losing her father to the spreading darkness was a moment in her young life that she would look back on forever. "She'll be fine," a young woman named Melissa told Sydney from the crowd. "She's always beaten them back, hundreds of times now. She'll do it again." From her vantage point on the top of the wall, Sydney could see Taylor battling the mass of infected humans that came to their doorstep every day. Somehow, Sydney knew this time was different. Instead of attacking Taylor in one massive onslaught, the hordes of infected were rushing her in what appeared to be strategic groups. Never more than a few at a time, they assaulted Taylor from all angles, trying to catch her off guard. To Taylor's credit, she was holding her own. How long she would be able to defend the Ark's gates was another question entirely. Already this offensive had been going on hours longer than any before. Sydney knew her friend well enough to tell when Taylor was beginning to tire. Her moves weren't as sharp, her motions not as quick.
Look at her, Sydney pleaded. She's out there alone. We have to stand with her. She's fighting for us all. We have to help.
The same woman who had voiced her opinion before did so again. "How are we going to help her? Captain Martin collected the few remaining bullets we have for an emergency. You want us to use our rifles as clubs?" This time, Sydney zeroed in on the speaker. Melissa was Wade Treadstone's personal assistant. She wasn't a bad person. Right now, she was a scared person. Sydney could see that reflected in the woman's eyes. "We use our rifles like hammers or our fists if we have to," another voice said. Sydney exhaled in relief. She recognized the voice, and she knew with it help would be on its way. "Sorry we took so long," Frank said, running up the stairs to meet the group. Jason was behind him. As two close friends of Taylor's, Sydney knew at least they would make an effort to help. Whether their effort would be enough to save the tiring Taylor was another question that would have to wait to be answered. 2. Taylor. The dread. That's what it was. Taylor knew this like she knew her own birthday. Somehow it was obvious to her. How her powers linked to their own was a question she had been trying to figure out for over a year now. Still, she was no closer to answers than she had been before. They rushed her in small groups she was able to quickly dispatch with the motion of her hand. For Taylor, being infected with the darkness during the escape to the secret outpost, the Ark, was only the beginning. An experimental serum had been used to try and counteract the effect of the darkness spreading through her body. The outcome was one nobody could have expected. Taylor Hart was given the power of telekinesis. How or why were questions she could only speculate on. However, it seemed right now, in this moment, her powers were a shield to those humans living inside the Alaskan outpost. Maybe the last outpost left to humankind. Sweat began to bead on her brow. Her breath was coming through her lips, labored and sharp. How long had this attack lasted? The answer was lost to her, but it had been longer than any other. Taylor motioned with her right hand at two men sprinting toward her from the tree line 100 yards from the Ark's outer wall. Black liquid was caked on their eyes, noses, mouths, and ears, the physical manifestation of the darkness inside of them searching for an exit route. Taylor took this in all in the space of a moment as she hurled them backward with the quick motion of her outstretched hand. The two men were lifted into the air, an invisible force sending them crashing somewhere deep in the forest. Relentlessly they came. Not like the many times before in one strategic attack rushing straight at Taylor. Now in small groups, zigzagging toward her with hateful eyes and quivering fingers. The repetitive motion of either lifting bodies, crushing them, or snapping their necks was like the constant strain of lifting a light weight. Taylor could perform the act a dozen times without tiring, but even the smallest weight, when lifted enough times, would prove a strain on the strongest arm. Taylor set her jaw and placed her back to the outpost entrance. She refused to give in to the weariness that screamed in her muscles. There was no doubt the coordinated attack of the dread was working. Already Taylor had been forced back as different groups came at her from all angles. Her eyes were constantly searching the battleground for where the next rush would come from. Then something caught her eye. A shadow where there should be none. Past the tree line where the sun beat down into the boughs of the pine branches, a dark mass stood staring at her, watching her. Although Taylor couldn't make out any distinguishing characteristics from the entity, it reeked of evil. A chill from the very top of her spine raced down to the soles of her boots. There was no doubt that someone or something was studying her, measuring her actions. Taylor was so caught up in the appearance of the sinister form she nearly missed the next attack. Multiple groups of 2 and 3 enemies rushed her from all angles. Taylor bobbed and weaved in a dance of death. Although she could manipulate her power over telekinesis without motioning with her hands, the act made sense. Whether it was in her mind or actually did help, the motion from her hands felt natural as she pushed back the oncoming assaults. It seemed to be a day of firsts. It was the first time the dread attacked in sporadic waves. The first time they'd dogged her for this long. And now, the first time the use of weapons were employed by the crazed human beings. Taken over by their very deepest recesses of evil, the dread had up until now relied on their teeth and hands to kill and infect other humans. Taylor had to do a double take when she observed tree limbs and rocks in the hands of her attackers. Her moment of awe cost her as stones were hurled in her direction. Taylor moved to hold the rocks in the air and send them back on her enemies. She was too late. The first volley of projectiles struck her in the shoulder, stomach, and left temple. Blood oozed into her vision along with a sharp staccato of pain. The raged humans howled with glee and sprinted ever closer to her position. Struggling to clear her mind, Taylor fought back the fingers of unconsciousness. This is it, she thought as her enemies gained ground. They were feet from her now. A stupid rock is how I go down. The next moment, hands were around her shoulders and waist. Taylor waited for the inevitable. She would be torn apart, all that she might have been gone in the space of a breath. Instead of feeling her flesh being ripped from her body, Taylor heard a voice. "Thought you could use some help." She blinked past the sweat and blood to find the familiar face of Jason Waters looking down at her. The noise of battle ringing around her, Taylor struggled to her feet and took in the scene. The gates to the Ark were open. Men and women streamed out of the compound and formed a line around Taylor at the same time those infected by the dread reached them. The sickening sound of crunching the bodies made when they struck one another at top speed echoed across the battlefield. In every direction, warfare took place in its most brutal form. Rifles and pistols were used as blunt objects from the defenders in the Ark, while the dread employed teeth, hands, branches, and rocks. Taylor struggled to find her footing on the uneven terrain of the Alaskan wilderness. "You've done enough," Jason said, maneuvering her toward the open gates of the facility. "Come inside. We can handle the rest of them." "There's so little determination in that lie, I don't even think you believe you can hold them off," Taylor said, running a hand across her eyes that did more to smear blood than clear her line of sight. "Now get off me. I can still fight." "You can barely stand," Jason said. Taylor lifted Jason off his feet and placed him back on the ground a few yards from her. She didn't wait to hear his objections. She had a job to do. Squaring her shoulders, she marched back into the fray. To their credit, the defenders were holding their own. Men and women fell, but the casualties were nothing like they had been during the initial outbreak of the dread. When they rampaged across the globe, nothing could stop them. Though these memories seemed a lifetime ago, in reality the memories were only 18 months past. Just as Taylor made her way to the front line, the fighting stopped. Without warning, without any kind of visible sign, the attacking dread broke their assault and made for the woods. Taylor squinted past the sunlights into the trees to where the shadow had stood before. If it wasn't her imagination, if it had been there at all, it was gone. 3. Taylor. It was different this time, Taylor said, shaking her head at the memory of the attack, the weapons that had been used, even the menacing silhouette in the woods. They're evolving, learning. Why would we have reason to believe that they can learn at all? Dr. Spear asked from her seat in the conference room. We have no evidence as such. If only I were allowed to study one of them, capture one alive. If we could try the serum again, then we could really find out what... We've been over this 100 times. Wade Treadstone interrupted from his seat at the head of the table. I will not allow one of them inside our walls. One misstep and we could all be infected. We owe it to ourselves and the greater whole of humanity, if anyone still exists, to hold caution in the utmost regard. Up until the last few months, Taylor had found herself agreeing with Wade's policy on no infected inside the walls. However, as the months passed, as ammo ran dry and food became an issue, Taylor was rethinking her stance on the subject. I'm sorry I couldn't be there, Captain Martin, an older, broad-shouldered man sitting to Taylor's right, said. I came as quickly as I could with the rest of our ammo supply when I heard this was something other than the attacks you've been pushing back for months, but I was too late. It's fine. Taylor waved away the apology. What we need now, more than anything, are answers. Here we go again, Dr. Spear said, throwing her hands in the air. If we've had the discussion about not experimenting on the infected 100 times, then we've had Taylor's talk of exploring beyond the walls 101 times. Taylor resisted the urge to snap the doctor's neck. It would only take the slightest twitch of her hand. Even a thought, and the deed would be done. Taylor pushed the idea out of her mind. What's our endgame here? To die? Her voice was so harsh, all eyes in the room turned to Taylor. She waited for a moment of silence to pass before she continued. Because that is exactly what's going to happen to all of us if we sit back and do nothing. We aren't doing nothing, Wade said, rising from his seat. We're surviving. Is surviving enough? Captain Martin said with a raise of his thick gray eyebrows. His words were far from a shout, still they carried the same kind of weight. Wade shot a surprised look at the captain. I know, Captain Martin said, raising his hands in a sign of peace. I know you're the boss. I know you saved us all when Lazarus Pharmaceuticals were being overrun. I know as an employee of Lazarus, you feel a burden to protect and save as many people as you can. But the fact remains, Wade. Sooner or later, we will have to step outside. Sooner or later, the lack of food will force us to. Wade's expression changed from one of reproof to fatigue. He retook his seat and breathed a sigh so heavy Taylor almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Frank, how long can we last? Wade asked. Frank Castor was a teenager with an IQ on par with Einstein. Hired by Lazarus Pharmaceuticals as a consultant when their drug Vanadrum first started amplifying the darkness in its consumers, Frank had been caught up in the events. If we continue to ration our supplies, 6, maybe 8 months. The terrain inside the Ark wasn't meant for crops. We're trying everything we can, but being met with very little success. Frank said all this with his eyes glued to the tablet in front of him. Taylor couldn't remember a time the youth was without some kind of electronic device to run graphs and numbers. This isn't a decision we can take lightly, Wade said. I can't order a group to travel outside the safety of the Ark. I can't purposely send men and women to their deaths.
You don't have to order anyone, Taylor said. I volunteer.
Taylor met Wade's eyes. Instinctively, she knew what he was thinking. He didn't trust her. Wade was afraid of things he didn't understand. Taylor's power, her connection with the dread, was something that he could not comprehend. The only reason Taylor wasn't undergoing extensive lab work and confined to her room was because the people inside the Ark loved her. They rallied around her and looked to her as a source of protection and hope. I'll consider your offer, Wade said. Until then, no one is to go outside the Ark wall unless to defend our position. Jason, I'd like you to stay so we can discuss the condition of our solar panels. The rest of you are dismissed. His words were like swallowing back bile. Why wouldn't he give her a chance? Taylor was halfway to her feet to object when she felt a firm hand on her shoulder. Talk with me first, Captain Martin whispered, motioning her to the door. 4. Valerie Spear. If the meeting had gone on a moment longer, Dr. Valerie Spear had already come up with a plausible alibi. She was saved from having to carry out her lie by Wade Treadstone's narrow view and his own eagerness to close the meeting. Valerie nodded where she had to and smiled her way out of the conference room. The Alaskan cold took her breath away as she exited the building. She forced herself to travel at a steady walk when every fiber of her being told her to run. Was she too late already? Was her work destined to fail before it had even begun? She threw caution to the wind and jogged the remaining few yards to the laboratory building designated for her use by Lazarus Pharmaceuticals. Her breath came out in light puffs of steam. Valerie composed herself and entered the structure. Plain tile floors and bright fluorescent lights ushered her to a receptionist's table where an alert middle-aged man sat leafing through an old magazine. Dr. Spear? He nodded in her direction before going back to the article he must have read a dozen times before. Valerie moved past him without so much as a nod. Her time was short. Making her way down the long halls and through the maze of the research facility, she ignored eye contact with everyone and walked purposefully. She didn't stop until she reached a key-coded door accessing the building's underground storage room. Her passcode was simple: 2020. The year Vanadrum awoke the darkness living in the hearts of men. Motion-activated lights lit her descent down the long flight of steel stairs. Once she reached the last step, she walked down aisles of equipment and medical supplies to the very back of the storage room. The air inside was musty. If Valerie had not been so used to the smell, she would have wrinkled her nose at the odor. The darkest, deepest end of the underground storage unit was a concrete wall. A section of the wall the light didn't quite reach was her destination. Whoever had constructed the facility years before had added an extra bonus, a room Valerie would have missed entirely had she not been the first one into the storage room when Wade and his team made their escape from the Los Angeles facility a year and a half before. A quick motion of her hand brushed back a hazardous warning sign whose frayed edges and dull coloring spoke of its age. Behind the sign was a keyhole. Valerie removed the long necklace from beneath her pristine lab coat. A small, unassuming key hung at the end, so contrary to the secrets it held. Valerie inserted the key with a quick twist. A hidden door camouflaged in the wall opened on command.
I
I did as you asked. He's not responding. He's strapped down and I gave him the serum, but nothing's happening. Valerie closed the door to the top-secret room behind her, striding over to her new specimen. That morning, while the infected carried out their assault on the grounds, a window of opportunity had opened for Dr. Spear. You can save him, right? Melissa asked, looking to Valerie with tear-rimmed eyes. Valerie checked the vital signs on her test subject. He was young, strong, with a chiseled jaw and a physique to match. It was clear why Melissa had fallen in love with the man. He's still alive, yes. How much of the serum did you administer? Only what you told me. 1 dose, Melissa said, resting a shaking hand on the arm of her boyfriend. He's going to come back, right? Just like Taylor did? He had the same kind of wound, a bite on his shoulder. I can't be sure of anything. I will do my best to bring him back, Valerie said. She scanned the machines monitoring the man's vital signs and pulled back his eyelids to shine a light in his pupils. How did you end up sneaking him in, by the way? Before you went into the meeting, Pete was still able to walk. He was fading fast, but I was able to get him down here and administer the serum as you instructed. And nothing since? No. Valerie began moving around the raised bed upon which her subject lay. Melissa had not followed her instructions completely. Pete's wrists and ankles weren't fastened to the steel bed frame as they should have been. You won't need to do that, Melissa said from her spot beside Pete. He's not going to turn into one of them. Look at his chest. It's rising and falling like it should. He's going to be fine. Yes, well, we certainly hope so. However, all precautions must be taken. Valerie strapped on the restraints to his ankles and wrists, after which she placed a heart monitor on Pete's chest. Melissa was right. Pete was breathing strong and steady. A look at the wound that had infected him revealed a nasty bite mark on the left side of his neck. It wasn't bleeding now, only raw flesh showed through Pete's pink skin. Black vein-like tendrils moved outward from the wound. I tried to clean it as best I could, Melissa said. Taking a deep breath, she prepared to ask the question she dreaded the most. When will we be able to tell? When will we get some kind of sign that he's going to be okay? For the first time since Valerie had entered the room, she gave Melissa her full attention. We won't know anything until he wakes up. That could be hours or days. Taylor was in and out of consciousness as she made the change, but it's too soon to tell if she's the rule or the exception. Neither woman witnessed Pete's eyes flicker open the slightest bit before closing again, his pure black orbs taking in the room with sinister intent. 5. Taylor. Captain Martin's quarters were right next to the armory. The room wasn't made for living at all. However, the captain insisted on being close to the compound's entrance and closer to the weapons that were under lock and key. His room was sparsely decorated. Besides the necessary pieces of furniture, such as a cot and a plain dresser, the only other thing was an American flag pinned on his wall. The lack of seating gave Taylor no other option than to stand. The captain closed the door, then held up a single finger in the universal sign to wait. He pressed his ear against the metal door. The seconds ticked by slowly, making Taylor wonder exactly what the captain was going to tell her to warrant such a mysterious meeting. A moment later, the captain turned to her, satisfied they were not being followed or listened to. "I'm sorry for all the dramatics," the captain said. Clasping his hands behind him at the small of his back, he began to pace back and forth across his small room. "But I've never done anything like this. This is an extreme situation, and in these extreme times certain allowances must be made for actions outside the chain of command." The words were coming out of his mouth like they were fighting one another to be spoken. Taylor had never seen the captain this strained or unsure of himself. Then it struck her why. "You're going to help me get outside the wall, aren't you?" The effect the question had on the captain was instantaneous. He stopped his pacing and stared at Taylor for a full minute. "Yes. Wade is a good man who's doing what he feels is best, but it's clear what we have to do. There is no future in the Ark. Remaining here is a short-term goal. We need a place better fortified with food, and what I wouldn't give for more ammunition. Our stores are nearly depleted. We have enough rounds to hold off maybe one more large assault, then it's knives and hand-to-hand combat like we had out there today. Most of these people aren't soldiers. They aren't trained like you and I." "I agree with everything you're saying, except for the we part," Taylor said. "You have to stay." Before Captain Martin could protest, Taylor continued. "There's something going on out there. The Dread are changing. They used weapons today. And on top of that, there's another thing I didn't tell Wade at the meeting. I saw something out there in the woods. Someone, maybe human, most definitely evil." "I'm still getting used to you calling them the Dread," Captain Martin said. "Well, that's what this darkness is. I would have told everyone what I know, but if Wade found out I can sense them at times, he'd have me chained up for sure." "No argument there, Taylor. Still, I can't let you go out there alone." "You have to," Taylor said, searching her mind for an argument that would make the captain realize this was the only way. "Someone needs to stay here and take care of the defenses. There's no point of me going out beyond the wall and returning with help if there is nothing to return to. We each have our part to play in this." The captain's jaw clenched and unclenched. He interlaced his fingers behind his head and stretched his shoulders as he swallowed her words and accepted them. "You'll need a distraction when you leave. They'll notice you're gone eventually, but it's not like we're sending anyone after you." "I'll leave tonight. I'll find help if any help exists outside these walls," Taylor said. Despite the danger she was about to put herself in, she forced a smile. "The fewer people that know, the better," Captain Martin said, already moving to his dresser and rummaging through the contents. "Outside of Frank and Jason, I wouldn't tell anyone else." "Sydney has to know," Taylor said, thinking of her small friend and the blow it would cause her to be left behind. "I can't do that to her. I have to say goodbye." The captain turned around with a map and a flashlight in his hand. "It's your call on who you tell and who you don't. Just be cautious. I can't give you much in way of supplies without drawing attention, but I can give you these." The captain handed over a detailed map of Alaska and the surrounding areas, along with a high-powered flashlight. "We should plan out your course once you get on the other side of the wall. I have some ideas on where you can go and the best places to find any other survivors, if there's any out there at all." 6. Taylor.
"No. Nope. Absolutely not. Not in a million years. I'm going with you."
Sydney's voice was so firm, so passionate in her desire, Taylor almost gave in there and then. It was only her love for the girl that made Taylor keep her resolve. "You can't come, Sid. You know how dangerous it will be out there. I'll have to move fast. At times, I may even need to levitate to get out of harm's way." Sydney crossed her arms over her chest.
"I can keep up with you, and if you do have to levitate, then you can take me with you. You can move whatever you want with your mind. I'm old enough. I should be able to make my own decisions."
Her argument made sense. In what kind of world did it make sense for a kid to make their own decisions on risking their life? Had things really become this bad? "Sid, no matter what you say, I'm not taking you with—"
"I'm going to follow you anyway."
Taylor heaved a gigantic sigh of exasperation.
"That's right,"
Sydney continued.
"Maybe you won't take me, but you can't stop me from following you."
There were tears in the young girl's eyes now. Raw determination, not sadness, pooled in her gaze. Sydney had lost everything. Taylor was all she had left in this world, and she was fighting tooth and nail to hold on. Taylor sighed.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?